Well, let's continue on with another classic album. We're coming into the last week of August, so yeah, let's talk about one that I'm surprised I honestly haven't really talked about in a full-length album review. I mean, I've talked about this album many a times. I even gave it a live stream way back when. But yeah, let's actually dive in and talk about this one. Fear of a Blank Planet by Porcupine Tree. So, I don't think Porcupine Tree, as many of these classic albums, I don't think they really need an introduction. Spearheaded by Steven Wilson, and it's got Richard Barbieri on, the sounds and synths. We have Gavin Harris on his third album with the boys on drums and percussions. You've got Colin Edwin on bass, and there's actually a few other individuals on this album outside of Steven Wilson and the three others. You have Alex Lifeson coming in on a song on this one, and Robert Fripp is also helping out. And of course, the unofficial fifth member of Porcupine Tree, John Wesley, comes in and helps out with some backing vocals here and there. So yeah, Fear of a Blank Planet is the 9th, 10th, or 11th studio album from these boys, depending on how you want to look at it, depending on what you want to consider a proper studio album, which ones you want to consider an EP or a collection or whatnot. This was the one that was released way back in 2007. The thing that I love, I mean, there's so much to love about this album, but one of the main things that I really do love about this album is just how crystal clear the concept is. And I don't feel as though the concept ever got lost in the fold. I felt like up until this point, and even moving forward, whenever Steven Wilson was considering and playing around with a concept album, he always kind of got lost in the weeds when it came to actually delivering on that concept from start to finish. He's always kind of flirting around with a whole bunch of like our relationships with technology, our relationships with others, fascinations between trains and serial killers, and writing this whole like soundtrack for a movie that never actually got made. So like I always felt like he has a good idea for his concept albums, but I always feel as though it just kind of gets lost in the weeds. It never really sticks the landing. And this is one of the first ones from him that really does stick the landing. And the concept on this one is looking mainly at youth's relationship with technology as this new opium of the masses. And I mean, I was one of those individuals in 2007. I was in my late teens, early 20s at that point, depending on what time of the year it was. This is definitely in the whole era of this is all bad, especially when we were starting to consider a lot more of like the prescription drugs and essentially just going into that for dealing with a lot of our problems. And the thing that I think, I don't know, like I'm always very critical of an artist or a statement that's always like, this is bad. It's like, okay, cool. Do you have any of the alternatives to that? That is bad. It's like, well, that doesn't really say anything, Like, yes, I think that's a really good thing to point out, especially when you're talking about, prescription drugs and over-medicating young adults and teenagers. But it's like, okay, but what should they do instead? And without really presenting any side argument or anything to kind of say, well, this maybe should be more of what they're doing, they never really do that, and that's a little bit of a shame. But anyway, talking about the main concept of this album, I think it's executed very well on each and every single track on here, especially like right from the beginning of Fear of a Blank Planet, the title track. It really does kind of like showcase how doom and gloom everything is. Like this is almost like the second wave of grunge at this point in terms of like this dour, very like nihilistic, very nothing makes sense. There's no real point to anything, in a very nihilistic and very depressive point of view. And the music showcases that and mirrors that. Like this is one of the heaviest albums that the band has put out, even after the, at points, heavier moments of the incident and now continuing closure, or closure continuation. But I still feel like as a whole, this album is probably their heaviest. Like it's definitely metal in so many ways, shapes, and forms. A lot of the music and like leading factors are Steven Wilson's guitar works with these very fast-paced guitar pickings, very similar to like what King Crimson was doing in the like 80s within their Three of a Perfect Pair suites. Very fast paced, very rhythmic in that sense, almost like meticulously fast and precise. And a lot of those tracks follow this suite. You look at Fear of the Blank Planet, Way Out of Here, and many parts of Anesthesia Eyes. But my favorite parts of this album really do come down to those more heartfelt, intimate pieces, like My Ashes, Sentimental, and eventually Sleep Together, which is a perfect closer of this one. Now let's talk about the big track of Anesthesia Eyes, which is the 17-minute big epic, and it's right smack dab in the middle. You know, it's a third song of 6 tracks, and in one case, I'm never a fan when a band puts the big epic right in the middle of the album, and this was kind of the MO at the time, you know? Like, this was something that a lot of bands were doing now that they weren't relying on records or tapes. They could put their big 20-minute, 17-minute track right in the middle because it's all on CDs or streaming. I just feel as though it breaks up the flow of an album when the big epic stance is right smack dab in the middle. Now, luckily, it works very well on this album because Anesthesia Eyes really is 3 different tracks. You know, you have a very solid opening, transitions into a very solid middle, and then closes with a much more somber piece. So the opening has this very rhythmic, very soothing aspect of it, very similar to a much more amped up version of My Ashes. It's almost like they took My Ashes and just turned up the volume quite a bit. A lot of this is due to the rhythmic and drumming styles of Gavin Harris on the drum works. His commanding beat and rhythm on this really does like knit this thing right down into the core, the center there. I'm loving how that rhythm is the heartbeat of this track. And then when it goes into the second part of this, it's a lot more bombastic. It's not quite as rhythmic. It's a lot more abrasive. And I love that big explosion right at the middle part, when everything just kind of explodes and we have this and it's just so fast paced and so blowing up your mind essentially. And then the final closing piece is very somber, very intimate, very like hypnotic in that way. And so really it's less one big piece and much more 3 connecting chapters in a bigger story. And because the song is structured in this way, I can give the big 17-minute track a little bit more of a pass because I'm not just sitting there for, 17 minutes in a single suite of music. The only track on here that I'm kind of less than excited about is Way Out of Here. I like Way Out of Here. It's a fine track, but when you compare it to all the other pieces on here, it is a little bit of the sore thumb, which is a shame because like this is probably the most technical track of the bunch, the very acoustic starting point. It's extremely difficult in order to comprehend in terms of how it's played on the acoustic guitar. And I'm sure if you're a guitar player, you're just salivating over the noodling of this. And this is actually something that I think Michael Eckefelt would apply to a lot of his tracks on Heritage, where this whole track really is centered on this guitar lick, this and that's really where this whole track is built up over. And it isn't until we get into kind of the big bombastic moment of this that is a little bit akin to how Anesthesia Eyes had. I don't know, it's not my favorite. And so finally I want to talk about Sleep Together, the final track, and this is one of my absolute favorite Porcupine Tree tracks. It's up there with Dark Matter, and I don't bring Dark Matter into the fold lightly because really these 2 tracks are very similar in how they're orchestrated and constructed. You have that very, I don't want to say somber, but like very mellow and hypnotic is a good word for this, hypnotic energy coming into the beginning of it that's released into the main chorus work that then goes back into the verses. I love that. And then when we finally have that big play out, I love how Richard is able to really construct so much different soundscapes and emotions in his playing styles. And it starts the whole build of this final piece with his synth and piano work. And I love the build and the climb that we have, and how crescendo-y it is at the end. You know, we have these overlays of strings coming in. It's painting such a beautiful picture. The big reprisal of the chorus that we had throughout the main stretch of this, and it ends the album off perfectly. So yeah, Fear of a Blank Planet really was a knockout. You know, like, considering this is, again, their 9th, 10th, or 11th studio album, and they're able to bring out their A game, probably their best album to date, you're really looking at something special here. This album, I think, really solidified the shift that progressive rock was going to see post 2007. Because I feel like pre-2007, the majority of the progressive rock landscape was a little bit more into the celebration of sound and the recontextualizing a lot of what the 70s was doing. So you had bands like the Flower Kings and Spock's Beard being much more symphonic in approach, a lot more, I guess, optimistic, and playing a lot more within the major chords in that case. And, you know, Fear of the Blank Planet kind of shoved that all aside. And after that, there was a lot more heavy emphasis on creating this, I don't want to say dour sound, but a lot more playing with the minor keys, a lot more melodramatic almost, like a lot heavier for sure. Like, there's a lot more, especially when we come into the 2010s, this overuse of, you know, metal aspects and approaches to progressive rock. And it was something that was definitely found within the neo-prog scene and sphere, and something that carried over within the symphonic prog sphere as well. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just, this was the one that kind of, you know, was that turning point. So yeah, that's really all I've got for Fear of a Blank Planet from Porcupine Tree. If you haven't already heard it, you got to go out and listen to it. Like, it's a staple of progressive rock at this point. It's what, about 15 years old at this point, if you can believe it? Like, holy geez, this thing is, wow. It really did set the stage for where progressive rock was going to go into the 2010s. So yeah, go and listen to it, because it is just a staple of progressive rock. So that's what I've got for you from Fear of a Blank Planet from Porcupine Tree. What do you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know by commenting down below. And thank you guys so much for watching my Summer of Prog, or I guess my August of Prog. I've been looking at a classic prog album every Tuesday and Thursday. So after this one, I've got 2 more, and that's it. You know, I'm not doing any more classic prog albums, maybe until next year. You know, maybe I'll do a couple of months instead of just the one, because I've been having a blast, and I know you guys have really been liking this as well. So yeah, that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.